Welcome everybody, welcome back, and thank you for joining me. If you're just joining for the first time, make sure you mention where you're from. And today we're going to be talking about creating a reflection in water. Now, reflections can actually have a lot of different effects. So if you've got the water really still, for example, you're going to have pretty much a mirror image. Then you've got these little gentle waves. That's kind of like what we're going to be doing today. And when there are a lot of waves, or if the water's quite rough, you'll see very little in the way of reflection. So the type of water that we're talking about here can drastically affect what kind of a reflection you're going to get. Now in this case, we're going to be doing a sunset. Let me just move on over to that image here. So we're going to be doing it. This is late day, it's sunset, but what I chose this one because it really emphasizes the contrast, that light and dark. So my hope was that you'll better understand the different effects that happen during when there's these gentle waves, and when you have a lot of contrast, that really kind of exaggerates it and shows those effects. So if you're just joining, if you want to make a question, if you want to ask a question, I should say, make sure that you put it in capitals, because I very often miss questions. When I read back through, sometimes I've missed a question and I feel badly that I've missed it. So if you have a question, put it in capitals so that I can spot it more easily. I don't have a tech crew or anything like that that sort of monitors that for me. So Catherine has a question. Could I discuss the impact of shadows on the reflections when the light is coming from the right or the left? Yes, I will talk about, because there's a big difference between reflections and shadows, like cast shadows, right? So sometimes you'll get, for example, if you had light coming from one side, for example, in this case, we've got the light sort of behind our subject. But if we had the light coming from the side, for example, we may actually have a shadow running across the waves. But at the same time, we would have reflections of this island, which of course would be more illuminated. It would be lighter because of the light on the side. But you would have reflection, not unlike what we have here. But then you would get, like, see all this light that's right here? That would be obscured if the light were off to the right, for example. So I hope that answers your questions. I may have to do like a couple of demonstrations on reflections, just because the lighting, as you pointed out, can affect it so dramatically, and also the water current. So, my goodness, I'm looking at all the where everybody's from: Lithuania, Texas, Cambridge, Greece, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Madrid, Florida, Ontario, Blackpooling, UK, and many more. Like, there's quite a few that mentioned where you were coming from. So read back, see where everybody's from. Maybe you'll find a neighbor or friend to paint with. So let's jump in here. I want to talk about how I'm going to lay this out. I did not pre-draw this. Very often with landscapes, I don't pre-draw. I will, and I sometimes will revert to even transferring by tracing, and I will do that as a time saver, or if the subject is especially complex, I will do that. But today we're just going to draw this as usual. If I were sitting here, for example, and trying to draw this. Now, it's a sunset. The light changes very quickly in a sunset. So if I were doing this in person, I'd have to work very quickly. Now, I find that this horizon line is a little bit too central for me, so I'm going to move it up a little bit. But for now, I just want to have a little discussion about the actual reflection. So if I put my pencil sort of right halfway between the horizon and the bottom of our reference here, you can see, you can actually count waves. All right, so what I'm getting at here is creating the illusion of perspective. So here we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 waves, 5, maybe 6 at the most. We can see actual waves, right? Like you can see where each one is separate. Above this, oh my goodness, we have many, many more. So countless number of waves. So that is a very important aspect to creating the illusion that you want. So you want to make sure that you are creating larger waves at the foreground, much smaller waves as we go off into the distance. And you'll notice the same thing happens with the clouds. So here we go. I'm just going to because we're talking about reflection, I'm going to do the sky and the water sort of simultaneously because, of course, that's what's being reflected. The island and the distant landmass here is very, very dark. When the sun is actually behind an object, it's going to be very silhouetted. So in that case, we really don't have to worry about putting in a lot of color or greens. Like, our head goes, oh, those have to be trees, so they must be green. But that's not necessarily the case in a sunset. It's going to be behind the subject matter. So I'm going to set this aside for a second. You've got the reference picture up here. This reference picture is also posted on my Facebook page, and I'm sorry if you don't follow Facebook. I may have to look at a way of adding it to my website, but of course, this is all additional work and cost when you're talking about additional pages on your website. And I don't want to clutter up my website either, but I'll see if I can figure that out so that everybody can access it. All right, so I'm going to be working on Arches 140-pound cold press paper. The size I'm working is a quarter sheet, or 11 inches by 15 inches. I'm going to be using a variety of brushes, synthetic, squirrel hair, flat, and round. And I'm using a variety of watercolor here, but mostly Da Vinci watercolor. The brand of paint that you're using really isn't that important, but use artist quality because it has a higher pigment ratio to filler, right? So you'll have richer color. And you'll be happier with it. So the one thing I found out when I was starting and I was using student quality is I just couldn't get the color very punchy or very rich. And one of the reasons was because it's a lot of filler. And so if I wanted rich color, I had to go to artist quality. So there's many, many good brands out there, so you're welcome to do that. So I just need to grab some paper towel here. Then I'm ready, but before I start, while I'm drawing, I'm going to soften up my paint. So I'm going to soften up by using a pipette here, and I'm going to be adding a generous amount of water to my paints. I don't know which colors I'm going to be using yet, so I'm going to just soften them all. I'm pretty sure I'm not using greens, but no harm. And by getting them softened up, that's going to allow me to get richer color or creamier color when I want stronger paint on there. There's nothing worse than trying to get good rich color out of a dried well. So this will really help to soften things up. And you can see that I'm not being skimpy about how much water I'm putting on here. I'm fairly generous with the amount of water because at first it looks like, oh my gosh, that's way too much water, and some people will just spritz, but I find that I can't really get it penetrating the entire well. I fill up my wells so they're there's a lot of paint in each one, like almost a whole tube in each one. So I will put a significant amount of water on there for it to penetrate. And in about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that, this will be soft enough that I can get the rich color that I'm looking for. So with an ordinary pencil, and this is just a Dixon HB pencil, says classmate, so it's obviously not a very fancy pencil or anything like that. I'm just going to start off with my horizon line. Now you can use a ruler if you want to, but I'm just going to use a straight line here. And you can also, you know, if you want to sort of use a finger as a guide or something like that to make sure that it's straight, you could do that. Okay, so I have my horizon, and you can see well, I guess I could make that a little darker. There's my horizon. I did move it up a little bit. My trees here. Now my island's a little bit lower, so we'll put that down here. It might be a little bit low, I don't know. We'll see. And my island is basically here. The reflection is here, so, and it's approximately the same size. Now, the length of your reflection will often be affected by your eye level, like your eye angle. If I'm looking down at something, if I'm looking, you know, if I'm in a resort town or something, and I'm in a hotel and I'm on the 5th floor and I'm looking down at a reflection, that reflection is going to be a lot shorter than if I'm right close to the water. If I'm right at that water level, that reflection is going to be a lot longer. Things off in the distance, also, you don't see the reflection because it is too far away for us to perceive that reflection. You'll notice that there's not that much reflection in the back, but on this right-hand side, that island or that water mass is much further away. Look at the water, there's no reflection. This one's a little closer. We do see a little bit here. And of course, this main island is much closer to us, so we definitely see that reflection. So the distance is one other factor to consider. Now we do have a little sliver of light here, so I want to remind myself that that's there by putting a little bit of like a little sliver of white in there. So I'll draw that in just to remind myself. And back here, this starts to taper off, and of course these get a little bit smaller. So that's basically my drawing. It's nothing too fancy. I know it's not very dark. I typically try not to put my drawing too dark because, of course, that ends up showing in the final painting. I don't want all those pencil lines, but I can generalize and get what I'm looking for there. Now, even though I've drawn this in this shape, that's not going to be the shape that I'm going to end up with. It's just going to give me sort of a scale of, I don't want to go out beyond the island. I want to make sure that everything's sort of lined up straight up and down. There's nothing worse than seeing a reflection that goes like off on an angle, or things don't line up properly. And so what I will do is if this was my line of vision, I will shift my body so that my eye is lined up directly, and I'll actually move my shoulders back and forth as I'm working each area. Because if I work off to the right, I might think I'm straight up and down, but I'm not. You know, especially if you're working larger, that's even trickier. Where do I find my reference? It's directly under the post for, I put it in the comment section under my post on Facebook for that reference. So let me double check that I've actually done that. Yes, it is. No, I didn't. I put it there and then I didn't hit send. It's there now. So there you go. Sorry about that. I think I've done it and then I haven't. So obviously I need more coffee. Just the thing about live, right? Things happen. But anyway, it's there now if you want to go have a look. You might hit the refresh page for that to show up. But that's where it is. It's directly under the post where I've posted the link for this. All right, so now let's talk about we're going to work light to dark, right? Obviously the island's going to be one of the last things we do, so I'm going to start with the light areas. In fact, I think I'm going to grab a bigger brush because I've got a fairly big sheet here, so I'm going to use a big a big brush that holds lots. Doesn't matter if it's round or if it's, this one's called an oval, or if it's a flat. As long as it holds a lot, I'm going to wet this sky. And I'm just going to keep coming down. In fact, I'm going to wet the whole paper. Because the first thing I want to establish is where that sun reflection is. I'm going to need a fair bit of light area where that is. And I have to lean over to make sure that I've got a sort of an equal amount of moisture everywhere. Now if I've wet the whole thing and then I try to paint around that sun, I'm going to have a little bit of a tough time because it's going to want to keep closing in. So one thing I will do sometimes is I might take a drier brush, not completely dry, but drier brush, and I will, because I can see a shine on the paper here, right? You can see that I've got this shine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift out a spot that's going to be a little bit drier, and I'm going to put that right here. All right, so you can see the spot I lifted out, right? I drank up some of that extra moisture, and I'm going to do the same thing in the reflection down here. It's a little bit more elongated. See, this is more round, but this one's a little bit more elongated, and that's that perspective thing happening. But as I show you the shine on my paper, you can see where I've identified where that's going to be, and that's going to keep some of that color I put down from seeping in and filling up where I want to keep those areas light. So if I take a bit of, I'm going to use a little bit of, I'm going to use a little gamboge, I think, and I'm going to go around this sun. I have to look for the shine. Oh, something was on my brush there. All right, we'll go around this sun with some yellow. Get that nice and warmed up around the sun. And I mean, the color of light around the sun is typically warm, particularly at a sunset. Right, so I'm going to get some of that around there, and you can see it's blending outward very nicely because it's wet. But where the reflection is, or I mean where the part I dried is not seeping in and filling in the way I might have been concerned about, right? So this way I can kind of keep it under control. All right, so there's my sun. I've established that it's not filling in. And I'm going to start working outward from there. So from there, I want to get something a little bit on the this printout on from my computer has certainly made my sky a lot more blue. But I think this is the actual image, so it's going to be a little bit more accurate. And I would say that that's a little bit more of a sort of a purple gray. So if I mix a purple, permanent rose, cobalt blue, whoop, a little more cobalt. Right, now that's obviously way too purple, so I'm going to use a little neutral tint for this. If I add neutral tint, that's going to give me that gray, but you can see when I stir this that there's still that little purple undertone. I'm going to make it maybe a little bit more blue. There we go. But now I need to thin it because remember we're working light to dark. But just before I do that, I think I want to get a little bit more around this that's warm. So I'm going to take a little bit more of my yellow and spread it out a little bit more. Now my brush didn't get 100% clean, so it's getting a little bit duller as it goes out, but that's okay. I need the clean part around the sun. That's the part that's important. I'm ignoring the island for now. In fact, I'm ignoring the reflection and the waves for now. I have to establish my my light areas before I get any further into the rest of it. So I'm going to take some of this. I'm going to take a little of this mixture here, mix it in so that it's not so bright, but it's turning a little green. So here's what I do. Add some more permanent rose to this mixture, and now I get something warmer. So I'm getting warmer, but I'm also getting duller as I go further away. Let's thin this a little bit more. So I'm going to come in and get a little bit of this warmth in the sky. And I'm kind of working as quick as I can here because I know that my paper is only going to stay dry for a certain amount of time, and then I'm out of luck. So I need to move along pretty quickly here. So I've got some warmth in there, and I'm going to start coming in now with my purple gray, blue purple gray color, and start to add in a little bit of color in the sky. So there's a little bit above these trees, but I'm going right through the trees. And since this is darker, I'm going to have to start considering what's going on with the waves. So let me put this right through this island and everything. And I want to go right through the island because I know that the trees are going to have a little bit of, they're going to have a little airiness to them. I'm going to see the sky through trees as well. So I need to include that. And as I come down, I can see that this kind of extends down. Maybe get a little more blue into some of this up here. Everything's good and wet. Now, if I feel like I'm running out of time, I could use my spray bottle. Right? If things are starting to dry, I can use my spray bottle, and that'll help me to keep things moving long enough for me to get this in. And I'm not placing anything too specifically yet. This is just getting rid of the white of the paper, basically. All right, so now we're coming down into some of this area in here. And what's going to be important is these little light areas. So I'm hardly going to put anything in here. I'm just going to put a little whisper of that in there. But I want to make sure I leave some nice light areas in there too. All right, so while this is, that's sort of covering the white paper. The only part I've left pure white is where the sun is. If any of that did happen to close in, I could take my blotted brush and drink it up and wipe it off, right? If I want to open up some of this, like if it still managed to close in more than I wanted, I can pull some of that up right now while it's still nice and wet. Okay, so that's kind of where the wet stage is, where we've really got just the white of the paper gone. It always feels good to get rid of that white paper because the white paper is so misleading in terms of helping you gauge the rest of your values. So I'm just going to take my dryer here and dry this. I won't get it 100% dry, but I need to get it dry enough that I can add in the next thing. Seamus is asking, when I use my spray bottle, don't I have the risk of cauliflowers in the painting? I make sure that I spritz it before the drying stage, before the shine is gone. I have to sort of always be conscious, what's going on my paper? How much shine is there? Am I, is it, if it's starting to go away, don't spray. I would let it completely dry, then re-wet and add that stuff in. If you identify that there might, it's almost at that stage, almost at the drying stage, that's when you can spray it. But if it's started and the shine is going, I would stay away. Don't try and dry it at that stage. So I'm starting to lose the shine now, but the paper's quite wrinkled at this point. And this is still the very, very light stuff in my painting. This is like super light. The lightest areas in here. You're welcome. It's a nice sunny day today here in southern Ontario. Yesterday we had rain and thunderstorms, and I was golfing, and it was not ideal, but it wasn't terrible. Fortunately it was the morning, so it wasn't too bad. This area was the last thing I did. It's going to be a little bit wetter, so I'm going to dry that a little bit more. And the corners always seem to stay wet a little longer than anything else. You can still see my paper's pretty wrinkled, but I would have liked to have actually put in some of my cloud while this sky was wet, but I knew I wasn't going to manage that all in one go. So I'm going to do it in another step. All right, so that should be dry enough, and we'll just let that cool back to, ooh, that's a little damp there yet. I'll do that a little bit longer, but some of this over here where I started is pretty dry. This side still needs a little bit more. It's the thing about live, right? I can't speed this step up. What colors I used in the sky? I used gamboge, which is a nice warm yellow. This one's Da Vinci, so it's a hue. It's actually a mixture, but it's a nice warm yellow. And then I created a purple with permanent rose and cobalt blue, but it was way too bright. So I used a little neutral tint to take all that brightness out of it and make it more of a purple gray. So that's the combination I used. When I wanted to dull down my yellow a little bit, I just put a little bit of this mixture into it. Add a little red if it gets too green at all. But with purples, it's always the ratio of blue to red, right? So you can make a red purple or you can make a blue purple. All right, so now that should be good now. All right, I'm going to start once again, clean water, cleanish water. My water's not that clean, but I'm going to start in the sky area here. And if I really want to keep things manageable, I could do sky, and then I could do follow up with this. I won't wet the bottom until I'm ready to do it, kind of thing. So if speed is your nemesis, then I would simply do one section at a time. So I'm going to do the sky. So I'm basically from the horizon up, right through trees, right through your landscape and everything. I'm going to wet the top, and once again I'll lift out where I don't want a lot of that color to seep into the sun. I can just take a dry brush here. Dry a patch where I want to keep that area nice and white of the paper. All right, so you can see I have dried an area. table's obviously on an angle. Every time I lift this up, my brush is rolled underneath. But all right, so I want to take some of this mixture over here, and I have to stir it up again because it likes to separate. So I'm going to stir it up again, and I'm going to start to bring in my clouds. All right, so this mixture will be good for that. And I'm going to blot my brush so that it doesn't just all fill in, right? I want to, this section over here is a little bit full, but then I'm just going to dabble the rest of my clouds in here. And I have to leave spaces in between because, you know, you can see that that's the kind of clouds they are. And when I come to the sun, I'm going to avoid it for now, but I'm going to make sure that my paint's not as dark. So I will blot my brush a little bit so that I'm not putting too much around the sun. I don't want it to ease into my sun. I mean, I did blot my brush, but I still don't want it to fill in. And I'm looking at this sort of diagonal that we have here. I think that that's kind of an important thing. And the clouds at the top, like right along the top here, they're bigger because they're closer. They get a little bit smaller. I'm going to even join some of these, but they get a little bit smaller as they go off to the distance. So these little dots are going to get smaller. And if I want to maintain them being small, I have to make sure my brush isn't too wet. Sometimes control over how wet your brush is will dictate whether or not something spreads on wet paper or whether it stays about the same size. So I want to keep it small, so if I take the moisture out of my brush, I can control that. Looks like I missed a spot or two with my water. Let's dot that in. All right, so I have a spot right here that looks like it's maybe a little bit dry. I'm going to spray it lightly. Not enough, so I'm just going to help it along with a blotted brush. Just rinse my brush and blot it and help that along so I don't get anything happening in my sky that I don't want. So just soften that in, and that'll be close enough. All right, so if I take my brush and blot it on my paper towel, I can get a little bit around my sun that won't spread too much. It's that blotting that's important. That controls how far it's going to go, right? It's really wet. I'll just darken a few more. With the sun behind the clouds, it makes the clouds darker. They're not like fluffy white clouds like you have in the middle of the day. They're always a little bit darker because the light source isn't on top of them or beside them, like to the side of them or anything. It's now more behind, so it's going to make these clouds darker, denser looking. All right, so I think that's given me the effect that I'm looking for. I think it could be probably a little bit darker, but you get the idea anyway. If I needed to get it darker again, I could let it dry, then re-wet and add some more. But at this stage, I think I'm kind of it's getting a little bit risky. So I do want to get a little bit more sort of blue on this horizon, so I'm going to put a little bit right along here above the trees. There's kind of that little bit of darker cloud formation there. We'll go right through this thing here because that's going to be that's going to be covered in dark. So it's this side and the other side that's more prominent, I think, in terms of this blue. It looks like I'm making it bigger, but don't forget the landmass has to go in there. I'm going to go to a larger brush because this one's not applying fast enough. It's too small a brush for such a big area, so I need to move to a bigger brush. There. That's going to be my sky. And now when it comes to the water, I want to keep in mind that we have these very, very light areas that are going to be sort of in the water like sparkles, right? So we've got these little bits of sparkle in the water and that sort of thing. So I can do a couple of things. I could either use masking fluid and preserve it that way, or I could simply paint around it, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm ignoring still the reflection. I mean, I have to put all this stuff in before the reflection. So I'm ignoring the reflection, but I'm looking at where these blues are. And I see that there is, these little white areas in there. And they're very small. The further away they are, the smaller they are. So I'm going to put this same kind of blue in here. This purple blue. Let's mix up some more because I don't think I have very much here. I'm going to put some more in there. And this time I'm going to dance around some of those little sparkles. I'm going to do a little bit of the same on the right hand side. And in this foreground, for the time being, I'm going to just kind of leave that alone for now. I'm really just concentrating on this one color. So I need to leave that there's going to be that little sliver of light land there. And as I put in my brush marks, I'm going to leave little gaps. You can see I'm leaving little gaps there. And sometimes you can just sort of squiggle your brush, and that's a great way to kind of create that. And if the squiggles are too long, you can break them up immediately. And you can see I'm getting a little bit of that that illusion where I'm trying to get a little bit of light on the water, reflecting on the water. And there's a gap here where you really don't see too much of that, and it's because it has to clear the reflection has to clear the top of the reflection of the of the trees before you actually see the sky being reflected. So that's why there's kind of like that solid band in there. All right, so now we're getting closer, so let's get more paint in my brush here. And those gaps are going to be a little bit larger. Now since we don't see, I'm not going to waste my time in there because I need to work quickly here. And I'm kind of stroking like this with my brush, and I'm deliberately leaving a few gaps. I'm leaving some of those lights in the water. Quite intentionally. And I'm making sure my brush is filled up so that it doesn't look like it's all piecework, like it's all like a patch or like a quilt. I want it to look like it's all continuous aside from those little white areas. So fill up your brush if you are doing that area, because that's what makes it look like it's all connected. And let's come down into here. All right, so now I'm going to come back to this color once again. After this layer, I'm going to come back to this color, so I'm going to mix up a little bit more of it. That's permanent rose, cobalt blue, a little bit of neutral tint. Now my neutral tint is Winsor Newton, but my other colors that I've used, my red, my blue, and my yellow, are Da Vinci. All right, so I'm going to tackle the other side. It's not quite as dark, I don't think. A little bit lighter back here, and probably more blue. So I'm just going to use a little less here. There's no gap. And I'm just going to come in here and I'm using horizontal strokes because that is the direction of the water. If I have any brush marks showing in my painting, I want them to be in the right place, like in the right flow for the water. So I'm going to come in here and just put in a lot of this sort of horizontal. And if I skip one or two, then that's fine. But you can see I'm not leaving quite the same sparkle as over here because this side doesn't seem to show as much of the sun reflection as, you know, right directly where the sun is. So I'm going to come in and paint this in here. And I want you to notice that things are very, like off in the distance, very horizontal, like very horizontal. Then as it gets closer, you know, where I'm standing when I'm taking this picture, the waves are starting to come in on an angle. So I'm definitely seeing a directional wave motion here. Okay. So I have to start angling my brush as I'm doing this. Plus, I have to remember how much bigger the strokes are going to get. So I have to fill up more in my brush, and these are going to start to come in more like really large waves. Am I trying to make it exactly like the photo? Of course I can't. You know, it's much too detailed for that, but I can get the general idea. And this part down here really does get pretty solid, so we're just going to come in here on this nice angle, trying to maintain that same angle. And every one of these waves sort of starts off small here and then gets larger and larger and larger. I think I just splashed myself here. Getting excited. Covered in paint now. All right, so what do I do when I get to this? Well, I'm going to go right through it. Like the sun isn't even there, but all right, so you notice all of this is actually filled in. This is all kind of one color in here, and the entire bottom, like right across the bottom now, is got paint everywhere. There's going to be a funny light spot there, but I'm just going to leave that out. Just going to fill that in there. And all right, so now I just need to somehow connect these two, right? So we've got one type of painting here, we've got another type of painting there. Now I just have to bridge them. Could I use a sharp knife to scrape out sunlight sparkles when it's all dry? You bet, you can. You sometimes have to be careful. I mean, I have used the scraping method with, let's say, limited success. I usually end up gouging kind of the paper itself, but the idea is that if you have more paint, it scrapes more easily. Seems the knife seems to be able to sort of grab a little bit more. But you know what? Experiment with it and try it out. If that's a technique that you haven't used, absolutely, that will work great. You can, like I said, you can use masking fluid or anything like that. You can sort of prepare all of this in between. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm just sort of adding in some parallel waves to connect these sections here. And so now, and then there's an area in this area here that doesn't really have too much going on, but it's got a little bit. It's coming down, and then it just sort of starts to taper off into little strands. So just sort of using my brush, the side of my brush here gives me kind of that nice shape for the water, those waves, that tapered off football kind of thing, and that's giving me a pretty good representation of what I want. All right, so I think it probably could use a little bit more cool color here. I'm going to dry this and then I'll put that in there, but I'm just going to do a little bit more here just to sort of establish where some of those lights are going to be. In the island. I know I'm going to paint over all of this anyway, but you know, just so that I can remember to leave those little gaps, because those gaps are kind of important. Shows the wave action. There we go. All right, so I have to wait for that to dry, but I'm going to come back in. No, I won't come back in yet because I am going to have to dry this. I just put my hand in wet paint, so it's not dry enough for me to work there. I'm going to wipe off my tape. All right, so I'm just going to dry this stage, and you can already see the feeling of perspective. You know, little tiny highlights here, very large highlights in the foreground. I still have my nice sort of white area there. If by chance you lost that, well, there's always Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, right? I mean, the sun, we're not painting back into it, so we can use the magic eraser, which does rough up the paper, but if you're just getting back to white paper, it's great. My favorite part to painting reflections is when you actually get the objects in that are being reflected. So that's always much fun. Yeah, light touch is, for scraping, you're right. It has to be a light touch. But careful observation. You can usually paint around these things as well. All right, so we're obviously going to be coming in, you know, progressively getting darker and darker each time. So this time I'm going to mix a little more neutral tint into this. In fact, I'm probably going to be using mostly neutral tint here. Love neutral tint. It's just such a nice warm, at least the Winsor Newton is, the warmer kind of gray. A little more color in it. All right, so just going to blot my brush here, and starting in the background, it's these waves here are so small. Like, I mean, they're so small. We really can't paint like one by one. It'll look very contrived. So I'm going to blot my brush with this color in it, and I'm going to dry brush across here, and that'll give me a kind of a broken stroke, right? You see that broken stroke I'm getting? And that looks like little waves off in the distance. Just a little bit of a soft brush, very gentle pressure. But then as we get closer, those become a little bit more linear. So I'm going to come in with some lines here. And once again, I'm going to start the process of beginning to angle, right? I'm starting the angling at this point, and my paint is pretty diluted. If I go too many values, this is going to really stand out like a sore thumb. I want to keep it subtle. I want to build up this texture without it being too crazy and pronounced. This is not much of my focal point, but I'm just going to come in with another value here, and hopefully you can see what I'm doing there, just a little bit in those spaces. All right, hopefully you can see my lines for my island. I think I can still see them. All right, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump ahead here. I'm going to take my neutral tint, significantly darker now, and I'm going to start back here where the distant reflections are. And these ones are very small. So blot my brush. This is a number, just so you can see with my pinky, it's approximately that size. And I'm going to, once again, I'm going to dry brush across here. Because this reflection of the trees is quite dark. So over here where there's no reflection, it needs to be subtle. But where there is a reflection, I want a significant difference in the value. Now I'm at the point where I've got the little sparkles in the water. And yes, as you said, you could scrape those out, but I'm going to sort of skip and dance around these. So with small strokes, because it's off in the distance, so I'm using small strokes. And you can do this pretty quickly. Doesn't have to be like a photographic representation. You can still get just as much of a feeling from a painted, like something that looks painted, as you can from something photorealistic. Keep that in mind. All right, so now we're starting to get to the top of the reflection of the trees. So this is where things start to break up. So I'm going to start really making more open areas in my strokes, not overlapping quite so much. And so I'm going to come in here, start breaking these up. It's almost like the dark is starting to overlap, and I get kind of this sort of thing happening between the light and the dark. So I'm sort of bridging this with little strokes that help kind of connect those. And I can still avoid some of those lights. So first you have a lot of strokes together, overlapping each other, and then you start putting a little more space, a little more air between each of the strokes. And so what I end up in here is, now I have light, and I have medium, and I have dark. So I have the white area, the very light wash underneath that's there. Then I have the this blue-gray. That's some of that is showing. And we have the dark that's going to be the reflection of the hill or the trees in the background. All right, so I'm going to come in now. And I think some of this would probably be easier if I got my actual islands in there. It's a little bit easier to get your head around, and then we can work in more detail in the foreground. So let's get our main trees in there. It always looks better anyway. So I'm going to use a fairly dense mixture of my neutral tint, and you can see that by wetting that first has really softened up my paint, and I can get real dark here. So I'm going to come along here, and there's that little gap I have to leave on the island, right? I have to leave that little sliver of light along the land there, and just get my tops of my trees, resembling something like what I have in my photo. They're pretty much a solid. We don't really see any detail in this because it's so far away and the light's behind it. We really don't see any detail in these trees. So the tops of the trees are pretty much going to tell the story, and it's familiar. So I mean, we all know what that sort of thing looks like. So I'm gonna, as I come down here, I'm just gonna come right into my island. And now trees is probably something we'll cover for another day, but they're a lot like these strokes here. I can create the look of a tree with pretty much that same sort of stroke. There's a lot of this that's going to be solid though. Now remember, this is the island, this is not the reflection. So most of this is solid. Goes right over to there. All right, so most of this is solid. We don't see through trees, we don't see through islands. So a lot of this is quite solid. And we're back to the same sort of wave stroke. And when I initially drew the island out, I deliberately didn't try to draw my trees in because I always find that trees just look better when they're painted with my brush or drawn with my brush using paint. Looks better than when I try to actually draw the tree and then paint it in. If I try to stay inside pencil lines, it always looks a little bit contrived, not near as natural, I don't think. That's just, I think that's just me maybe, but you can let me know if that works for you too. I just find it's much better if I don't have to slow down and stay within the margins so much, or pencil lines. Don't forget, there's a couple of little gaps in the trees here because that's typical of trees. Now, you could be doing the same sort of scenario if you live somewhere where you don't have these kind of trees. Maybe these are palm trees. You would just treat it the same sort of way. You would still do it with the light behind. You would do it very silhouetted. Same idea. Just, you'd have a different tree shape. Actually, have several holiday photos of palm trees and things like that where I could do it in exactly the same way. It could be a silhouette of anything for that matter. It doesn't have to even be an island. Just checking to make sure I haven't missed any questions. And don't forget, you can always add your suggestions for this is a request. I had this request actually several times, so I decided today's a good day to talk about reflections. And So if you have a request for a demonstration, by all means, and I might suggest don't make it like super specific. Like I want to paint this mountain and this house in front and this stream. You may want to. I will generalize. I will probably do something a little bit more generic, but the technique won't be any different. So I'm probably not, and I will generally only paint from my own references anyway. So if you send me a reference, that's great, but I prefer to work from my own photos. There's something about working from your own photos that makes it feel a little more your own. I don't know. Do you feel that way yourself? I do. I think it always feels a little more genuine when I've painted it from my own references. All right, so getting to the end of the island, the last tree here is a little bit sparse, so we'll just do something a little bit sparse here. And then the distant landmass there, which obviously goes off into the distance because we have a definite reduction in size here. So we know that this is getting smaller and further away. All right, so now we have our land in there. Well, that feels better already. So let's get a little bit more in there. I think I could probably make these a little taller. But everything's nice and wet right here, so I'm able to still come back in. You do have to be careful coming back in and adding more details because as things get lighter, this could look patchy. So if you can do it all while it's wet, that's better. But if it does, like let's say, okay, so if I put some lines in here, you can see that's going to show, right? And if you have something that doesn't look quite the way you want it, sometimes the easy solution is just to get it all wet again. If I wet all of this one more time, aside from the detailed branches and things like that, but if I wet all this one more time, that's all going to dry smooth. Right? Much more even. Same thing here in the distance. That I could make a lot more consistent if I came through and just re-wet all of this as close as I can to the original. And I can get that looking sort of more uniform. A lot more solid, even a little bit darker if I need to, right? So I can come back in. And very often people forget that they can take a wash and just wet it again and it just gets a lot smoother. It's like, it's such an easy solution, it can't be that simple. But often just re-wetting something will smooth things out. I mentioned the example I gave last week was the painting right, where am I here? Right here. This one here with the stripes, and I had that very, very dark background, and it wasn't very smooth. And so I re-wet it all. Now I can see that this reflection, it's a little too light yet, so I still need to come in and get a little bit more going on in here so that it's more equal to the value. So I'm going to come in and just add a little bit more in here, and I don't really mind if I don't hit the very same spots. It's more important that I come in and recreate the same value than it is for me to have the reflection much lighter. That would be very strange to have the reflection a lot lighter. Often, not every scenario, but often the reflections are darker than the subject itself. You know, that's particularly noticeable in daytime references, rather not so much with a sunset, but with daytime references, you might see that the reflection is actually darker. Certainly, if this object is light, if it's a white boat or something like that, the reflection is actually going to be darker. But something that's already dark, it's going to be just about equal to what was there, or like what's above. All right, so we have this reflection is looking pretty convincing, I think. And let's close that little bit in there. I don't think that there's a little space filled in there. And I'm going to come down and start thinking about the reflections of the island now. So as I come down into the island, once again, I'm going to have this really dark, solid section, right? It's going to be equal to that. But take a look at the picture. We start getting down to, where the tops of the trees are being reflected, it starts breaking up like crazy. So I'm going to be taking that approach as I come down. And once again, we have this angle that we have to consider as well. So I'm going to leave little margins of reflection coming through on an angle, right? Because that's the direction of the waves. So we're coming in here, we've got little gaps like this, here and there and everywhere. And I'm not overly concerned with what's underneath here. I'm just leaving light areas, and they will be probably a variety of colors, and that's fine. I can't slow it down to make it perfect. The more of this you do, the better and more intuitive things will become. But you can see that if I just put these sort of diagonal strokes in, much like what we did here on the light value, if I do the same thing on this dark value, it ends up looking pretty convincing. That one's not so big. Make it a little smaller. Right? So we're getting these little highlights coming in here. And let's take a look at the right side. I'm always looking because, I don't want to go on autopilot and say, okay, that's how the whole island gets done, because it doesn't. Here, where we don't have as much sort of light poking through, it becomes a little bit more broken up. So this one's a little bit more of the just the diagonal lines. I'm not worrying so much about the whites showing, but it has a slightly different look. Let's all right, so I don't want to go any further, because that's like the same, almost getting to the same distance for the island itself. You don't even see where the island ends and the reflections begin. So now there's kind of a dark solid section here. So let's put that in. And then we have yet another sort of dark solid section, and I can sort of connect them with some strokes, but I can actually identify the reflection of this tree is that one, the reflection of this tree is this one, and so on, and they're absolutely lined up directly below or above the reflection. And I'm correcting the top because I don't think I am exactly in the right alignment. So I'm leaning over here to make sure that they're aligned properly. And then we've got this last one here, which is a lot of little skinny strokes. And then they just become like little gaps in between and so on. And then you get these, that correct effect. Now I'm kind of on an angle here because I haven't come down into these. This is the most, in my opinion, the most interesting part. We have these dark reflections that now go beyond, if this were really still water, and this would be the same size and it would be exactly smooth and everything. But here it starts breaking up into all these abstract designs, and they once again follow these contours. So there's these things that happen in this part where it starts to follow those waves, and then it connects to that shadow, like something like that, and then it might go in the other direction and follow the direction of the wave, and just sort of keeps what's the word I'm looking for? Transforming, I guess, into all of these abstract shapes. And so I'm going to put these, they get thick, they get thin, and sometimes they just end, right? They just stop like that. And you might get these sort of strange little amoeba type shapes in there and that sort of thing. But look how it breaks up into these weird kind of elongated forms following the waves. It's like the top of the wave, not much of a wave, but the top of the wave is catching the reflection of the island, whereas the bottom of the wave, or the valley of the wave, shall we say, is hitting or it's reflecting in a different direction, so it's hitting the light. So we're getting sort of all this sort of strange abstract that happens. And then you may get things like in the light area, all of a sudden you get this dark. Right, so I'm sort of filling in, leaving the gap of light around it, but I'm getting this dark that's coming in every once in a while. So you get the feeling of those waves and the directional of that and everything. And I definitely want to come in, and I'm going to adjust values and bring in some more in this foreground. Could I use other colors in my dark neutral part to add interest? Oh, if you mean this part? Yes, I'm coming to that. Yeah, I think that's what you meant. When I mix neutral tint, the mixture is transparent enough, or is it became a little bit opaque? I'm thinking you meant a little bit paddle. Doesn't make sense. When I mix neutral tint, the mixture is transparent enough, or it became a little bit, I'm thinking you meant opaque, but yeah, it still stays a little bit transparent. The difference between Payne's gray and neutral tint tends to be a little bit more transparent. But you can use it fairly thick and it can look very dark. But a dark can even be transparent. All right, so I'm going to come in and just add a couple more, and you can see that this reflection is actually getting longer than the island could possibly be. You know, the island doesn't come near that far. It's just the way that the reflection is affecting it. So I'm going to come in now with I'm going to put my purple mixture back together. So a little bit permanent rose, a little bit of cobalt blue. Don't want to make it too pink. I want to make it a little bit closer to a blue purple. And a fair bit of neutral tint. So I'm going to come in now and I'm going to reestablish some of these darks down here. By doing them lightly, it gave me the opportunity to sort of visualize it then, you know, before I commit to it with a dark tones. I would suggest that as you get more confident, go ahead and just put in the right value in the first place. Painting will be fresher for it, and so on. So, but let's face it, most of us aren't that confident, so coming in a little bit lighter is a good way to ease into these things, and it does give us a little bit of variety. So I'm coming in now, and there's a noticeable difference here between these two values. One is definitely more sort of black looking, like the island, more solid looking, whereas the rest of this is it's definitely got a bit of color to it. Let's come in here, coming in between all of those shapes. You can see how important those light areas in between are. That's just the way that the light gets treated on those waves that are going in all different directions. You know, they face the top of it's rounded, so it's facing and reflecting sky, and then the valleys might reflect the island or vice versa, and so you get all this really strange abstraction that happens. I'm coming in here with as much wet paint as I can because this is a big area to fill in, so I'm really filling up my brush. Always use a light touch on your paper too, because the light touch will allow your paint to sit more on the surface rather than to sort of push it in and have it sort of lock into that spot. So you'll be able to allow all your colors to flow together a little bit more easily. All right. Bring that up a little bit more. Get lots more paint in here. Always a light touch. Keep that paint, keep your brush loaded when you're doing a big area like this, because the wet paint and while you're picking up more paint will stay wet so that they flow together more naturally. All right, so let's come in now, and still need more color. Should have mixed up a much bigger puddle, I think. Let's get a little more here. So it's pretty much a lot of the same color, but what we are doing is, you know, sometimes I'm thinning it more than other times, depending on what I'm doing. But I'm also like blotting my brush. If it's a small area, I have to blot my brush so it doesn't sort of get out of control on me. And as much as possible, I'm trying to sort of transition some of this as well. This is dark. I don't know how dark that's going to end up, but I'll wait and see. And I'm going to come in with a little bit more back in here, bridge some of this. So there's a lot of sort of connecting of techniques that I'm doing here. where, you know, if I just left that solid, it doesn't look right, right? It's kind of, it needs something. It needs those smaller waves in there to make this look like it's actually all of the same type of motion in the water. Even though these ones were so big because they're in the foreground, we have to make the smaller waves. So I'm using a kind of a horizontal stroke, but multiple times on a diagonal, if you know what I mean by that. So I'm kind of coming across as the water waves come in on a diagonal, and then they start straightening out as I work my way up, because, you know, the closer to the horizon they get, the more they level out. And so now it looks more fluid, but I still don't love this area. I want to put a little bit more color into here, I think. So how am I going to do that with paint already on here? The key here, and I've had to do this in a number of paintings where I've gotten to this stage and went, oh yeah, but I don't like that. I wish I'd done my wash a little bit darker there. So I'm going to show you how I would handle that scenario. All right, so let's see here. I think I could come in and dry this. So we're getting pretty close here. As I said, I probably would have come in with a little bit more in my sky. I said that in the beginning, and I can see now that, yeah, definitely could be a little bit darker. It's very difficult to do anything about that at this stage, because if I hit the tops of those trees and that starts to run, then that's game over. That things start bleeding out. So when you're doing your first layers, do make sure that you get this exactly the way you want it. And if you're not sure, use your reference picture. Put a Is that dry enough up there? We'll put a little square on one part of the photo and then on yours, and you can see, oh gosh, you know, I'm way too light. And I knew it when I was doing it, but I just didn't want this demo to go too long. So I didn't go as dark as I could have. But I'll show you what you might potentially be able to do. All right, so what potentially you could do after this cools off is I could come in. I really don't want to disturb anything. I dried it. That will kind of set the colors a little bit, keep them from moving too much. Now, the key here, when you're coming back into an area and you want to add a little bit more after some of the darks have gone on, I don't recommend it. Let me underscore that. I am not recommending coming back in after you've got your darks on, because that makes it very difficult. Do it before you add your darks in. You run the risk of potentially botching it at this point. So, but you know, if all is lost, and we've all been there, right? You get to a point in your painting, it's like, well, I should have done the sky darker, and now I can't do anything about it. Well, it's not that you can't do anything about it. Yes, you can, but you have to do it very, very carefully. So if I were to take and brush wet paint all over here, I could, or wet brush, just clean water over here, I could potentially make blossoms, right? So what I'll do is I'll just spray this, because spraying, it doesn't add any motion to what I'm doing. If I just spray, nothing moves, right? And I want to add a little bit more color to this area here. So I'm going to take a little bit of this here, and with the lightest touch I can possibly muster up, I can come in and move that around. Now I did dry the first layer, so it's really staying pretty put. It's not moving too much. Now where I've got the extra dark up here, that could be a different story. This one's not too bad. I'm going to spray again. And I want to get a little bit more of my gold around the sun too. So I'm going to put in, maybe I'll use a little quinacridone gold. Let's say I want to brighten it up a little bit more. And so I'm going to come in with a bit of quin gold and really punch up that reflection there. You can hear my spray bottle. It's kind of a noisy sprayer actually, but I'm going to overlap those a little bit just so that they kind of melt in together. But I didn't get it wet enough that any of this is filling in. You notice that? I can see a little bit of that was one of the last things I did here. So I can see it softening. I mean, the edges of these shapes are softening a little bit. There's no getting around it. There's a little softening happening, but I am happier with that effect. Now I got it in the water. I'm going to have to add it in my sky now too, because it wouldn't reflect that way if it was not in the sky. So what I will do is I'm going to take, now since there's not a lot of paint to move here, I'm just going to come up to, as close as I dare around this tree line. You can see I'm kind of ducking in and out. Oh, I hit a little bit there. It's starting to run. That's why I'm being very careful with this. As I said, you have the potential of really botching it at this point, but if I'm really careful not to actually touch my trees, I should be okay. But one thing about neutral tint I found is that it does move pretty easy. It will move really easy. So I'm just tucking in as close as I can without actually touching it, and we'll see how I can do with this. As I said, I could botch it. Nothing I can do about it. We're live. You're going to see me either botch it or repair it, one or the other. So we'll see. We'll see if I can do it. So coming along. Now I'm going to come in here and wet all this, including my sun. I'm going to wet right through that because I'll dry that. And the reason that I didn't just paint around it is because I don't want a hard line around my sun. By lifting it out, I get a soft line around my sun. I'm looking for the shine, see what I've hit and what I haven't hit. Okay, so that's all wet. Let's dry a spot for my sun. That's good. I'm going to take this flat brush. This flat brush is pretty good for this. All right. Now I can come in, and if I want to get a little bit more action happening in my clouds, this is the point where I can do that. So I'm going to come in with, I want to make it a little bit more blue, I think, but add a little cobalt blue to that. And I can come in now and start to put in, I'll start with the bigger clouds first, and then as things get a little bit more dry, starting to dry, then I can come in and do that. But I want to get this sort of this nice quinacridone gold happening around the sun. Let me get this brush a little cleaner first. Thorough cleaning of your brush in between can make a difference between mud or not. So I'm going to get a little bit of that warmth around that sun, really make that warmed up. Now, doesn't that feel a lot different now with that warmth around the sun? Right, now I'm going to get more clouds. And every little sort of dot that I put in there with this color is going to grow, right? So I have to keep that in mind. If I paint it the size I think I want it, it's going to end up too big. So I'm blotting my brush. Blot my brush so that, because on a wet surface, I know it's just going to grow and grow. Come in with my little dots here and there, little dashes, I should say. I don't want to make them dots because they'll all look round. But if I come in with little dashes on those diagonals, much like we did with the water, in fact, then I get that feeling of perspective in the sky. So let's come in along here, the top of the, right, skimming the top of that sun. And I can come in and I can build up some of these clouds a little bit more. Always blotting my brush. I blot my brush an awful lot. I don't know if all artists do it, but I find that for me, that works in terms of giving me the little bit of control that I'm looking for. Everybody has their own method, right? Whatever works for you is the right way to go. But for me, that tends to work very nicely. So I'm getting a little bit more depth in my sky built up. So blotting my brush is really helping a lot. And then a lot of this is kind of just sort of dabbled in and overlapping, so I don't have to leave a lot of gaps here. All right, so my sky feels better. I feel better about my sky. It's I didn't ruin the painting, amazingly. The only downside that you might find to coming back in, now I didn't come close to my land, right, or my trees. So what you could end up with, and let me zoom in on this. All right, do you see where I've kind of gone around this tree and there's like a little thing there? Well, you could do a little bit of sort of minuscule surgery at this point if you wanted to. Let's take a small brush. Let's find one that actually has a decent point and blot it. And, you know, while this is wet, I could come in and just carefully manage those things. So everything above this right now is still pretty wet. Let me tone down the light here. Maybe this will show it better. Okay, so if I tone down the light there, you can see that there's these areas where I hit the tree and so on, and it's left kind of a funny halo around the tree. So, I mean, while things are wet, you can come in and sort of manage that to some degree, but you've got to be careful because hitting those darks is going to make them run. So, but, you know, I think if somebody was looking for it, they'd find that, but overall, I think it's fine. So let's zoom out. Where's my zoomer? My remote. All right. So it looks a little bit light. It's in person, it looks a little darker, but Let's see. I can adjust this to a little bit more like what it actually looks like, so probably more like that. And so that's kind of what I painted. So it feels a little bit more like a sunset. It was looking a little light on the screen, but overall I've got something pretty dark. I've got these little highlights in the reflection of the island. I've got highlights in the waves in the foreground, but I've really created some perspective. And regardless of the type of landscape that you're, or waterscape that you're doing, whatever's in the foreground is going to be a lot larger. AFA Sky Goddess says, do you find that Payne's Gray will move less than neutral tint? Not really. But what I do find is that Payne's Gray is a different, like it's a different kind of gray, but it's also very staining. So if it runs, yeah, that's kind of, you're kind of done. So Payne's Gray, I know if you've ever used Payne's Gray and got it under your nails or anything like that, it's forever before it washes out. So neutral tint, I find I can wash out of my hands and it doesn't stain. So now that's every paint company has a different formula for neutral tint. So so you may find it different depending on what brand you're using. But experiment and find out what works best for you. Like I said, you don't have to paint exactly like me. Sometimes it's better to be you. So I'm just going to wipe this tape off and show you what this looks like with the tape off, because it always looks ugly with the tape on there. So I always like getting this off. This part's great. But I'm not going to unstaple it until this has dried 100%, because that would completely defeat the purpose of me stretching it. So you stretch it and you paint it, and when you stretch it, it's as wet as it's ever going to be, because it's wet front, back, middle, and everything. And then you paint it, and it gets wet again. It does sort of wrinkle up a little bit again. It does happen, but it never gets quite as wet as it did the first time. So the most shrinking happens the first time, and therefore whenever you paint it, it may wrinkle, but it will dry completely flat, but only if the staples are still there, because the staples are what really holds it. So let's take that off. It looks so much better without the tape, don't you think? So I always feel glad when that tape comes off. So that's our reflections. I hope you enjoyed that one. Just a little note, next week I will not be here. Sorry, I am teaching a full week workshop, and so I will not be available to do my live demo, but I'll be back the following week. So we'll see you then, and hope you have a great time. Bye for now.